Real Stories Diary presents a tale of courage and justice that will grip your heart. Elliot Carter pushed open the heavy oak door of the Maplewood Beastro, his worn flannel shirt and scuffed sneakers blending into the evening crowd. A disguise that cloaked his identity as a billionaire with a heart still tethered to his humble roots. To the world, he was Tom Reed, just another weary traveler craving a warm meal. What dark secret was hiding behind the cozy glow of this small-town restaurant? Stay tuned with Real Stories Diary to find out. But in truth, he was the silent owner of this struggling restaurant, a charming haven of exposed wooden beams and flickering candlelight tucked in the heart of a small town. 6 months ago, he'd acquired it through a discreet holding company, drawn by its rustic allure, but troubled by its dismal numbers, food costs spiraling, reviews souring, and a staff turnover that churned like a restless sea. Tonight, he was here to feel the pulse of the place, to see beyond the spreadsheets that painted a picture of failure. The air inside was thick with tension, the kind that settles into your bones. As he slid into a corner booth, its cracked leather seat offering a view of the entire dining room, the hostess, a young woman with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, handed him a menu with trembling hands, avoiding his gaze as if eye contact might betray her. Nearby, the manager, Victor Clean, prowled the floor like a predator, his slick hair gleaming under the dim lights, his voice a sharp blade as he berated a busboy for a smudged glass. The poor kid's shoulders slumped in defeat. The waitstaff moved like shadows, their faces etched with exhaustion, their chatter muted despite the lively hum of customers savoring their meals. Elliot's eyes landed on Laya Harper, a waitress in her mid-20s, her auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail, her hazel eyes carrying a weariness that clashed with her practiced smile. She approached his table, her voice soft but steady as she took his order for a salmon dish. But when she turned to leave, her glance darted toward the back office, a fleeting shadow of fear crossing her face. What was Laya hiding, and why did she look so afraid? Keep listening to Real Stories Diary for the shocking truth. Elliot's instincts sharpened. Years of clawing his way from a dishwasher in a greasy diner to a titan of industry whispered that something was deeply wrong, something that went beyond bad management or tight margins. He remembered his own days as a teenager, scrubbing plates in a place where the owner's greed crushed spirits, docking pay for broken dishes and stolen moments of rest. That memory stirred now, a quiet ache in his chest as he watched Laya weave through the tables, her shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible burden, her smile faltering when Victor's gaze swept over her. The bistro's warmth, with its scent of roasted garlic and fresh bread, felt like a fragile facade, hiding a truth that Elliot was determined to uncover, not just for the sake of his investment, but for the people who poured their lives into this place, their struggles echoing his own past. He sipped his water, his mind racing, knowing that tonight's visit was no longer just about numbers. It was about the human cost he could feel in the air, the silent cries for help he was beginning to sense. Laya Harper approached Elliot Carter's table with a plate of steaming salmon, her movements deliberate, but her fingers betraying a faint tremor as they brushed the edge of the worn wooden table in the Maplewood Beastro. Her polite smile, practiced and professional, masked a tension that only someone like Elliot, attuned to the undercurrents of human struggle, could detect. As she set the plate down, her hand moved with a swift, almost imperceptible motion, slipping a folded napkin beneath the charger, her whisper barely audible over the soft jazz and clinking cutlery that filled the cozy dining room. "Enjoy your meal, sir," she said, her voice steady, but her hazel eyes flickering toward the back office where Victor Clean's shadow loomed, his presence a constant weight on the staff. Elliot, still cloaked in his alias as Tom Reed, felt his pulse quicken. The subtle act carried a gravity that shifted the night from routine to pivotal. He waited until Laya vanished into the kitchen, her auburn ponytail swaying slightly, before lifting the plate, his fingers brushing against the damp, plastic-wrapped napkin, its edges curling from the heat of the dish. Unfolding it carefully, he found 4 words scrawled in shaky, hurried handwriting: "He's stealing from us," below, in smaller, more desperate script, a plea: "Please help." The words struck like a lightning bolt, igniting memories of his own days as a teenage dishwasher in a greasy diner where the owner docked wages for broken plates and stolen moments of rest, leaving workers like him powerless and humiliated. Laya's note was more than a message, it was a cry from someone trapped in that same cycle of injustice, and its weight settled like a stone in his chest. How had she known to trust him? The thought gnawed at him. Did she suspect he was more than a random customer? Perhaps she'd caught a whisper of his true identity as the silent owner. The risk she'd taken was staggering, especially as he later learned she was a single mother, supporting a younger sibling on the meager wages of a waitress, every shift a battle to keep her small family afloat. The bistro's warm glow, with its scent of roasted garlic and fresh bread, faded as his mind sharpened. The chatter of diners and clatter of dishes became a distant hum. He glanced around, noting the security cameras perched in the corners, their red lights blinking like unblinking eyes, watching every move. Victor's sharp voice cut through the air again, berating a young server for a spilled drink, the poor girl's face crumpling as she apologized profusely. Elliot saw Laya flinch from across the room, her shoulders tightening as she balanced a tray of glasses, her eyes darting to avoid Victor's gaze. The napkin's message burned in his mind, a call to action he couldn't ignore, stirring a resolve he hadn't felt since his early days building his empire from nothing. He ate slowly, each bite of the perfectly cooked salmon tasting like ash, his thoughts spiraling back to his own past when he'd sworn never to let greed poison the places he built. Laya's courage, this tiny act of rebellion, was a mirror to his own younger self, when he hitched extra food to a hungry coworker despite the risk of the boss's wrath, a small defiance that kept his humanity intact. He wondered how she'd known to reach out. Had she overheard a rumor? Caught a glimpse of his name in some forgotten paperwork? The note's shaky handwriting spoke of fear but also defiance, a spark that reminded him why he'd fought so hard to rise above his own beginnings. He folded the napkin carefully, tucking it into the pocket of his flannel shirt, and finished half his meal to avoid drawing attention. When Laya passed by again, clearing a nearby table, he caught her eye, offering a slight nod that carried a silent promise he wouldn't let her down. As he paid his bill in cash, leaving a modest tip to maintain his cover, he felt the weight of her trust pressing against him, a responsibility that tethered him to this place and its people. Stepping into the cool night air, the bistro's warm lights fading behind him, he didn't head home, but drove to a quiet parking lot 10 blocks away. The napkin's words burned in his pocket. He sat in his car, the engine off, the silence amplifying his racing thoughts, knowing that this note wasn't just about a failing restaurant, it was about lives being crushed under Victor's greed. And Laya's desperate leap of faith had set him on a path to unravel the truth and make things right. Elliot Carter sat in the dim glow of his car's dashboard, parked in the empty lot of a 24-hour diner 10 blocks from the Maplewood Beastro. Laya Harper's napkin clenched in his hand, its words asterisk he's stealing from us. Please help asterisk searing into his mind like a brand. The night was quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the faint rustle of leaves skittering across the asphalt. But inside him, a storm raged, fueled by the injustice he'd glimpsed and the courage of a waitress who'd risked everything to expose it. As a billionaire who'd built his empire from the ashes of a hardscrabble youth, Elliot knew the sting of powerlessness, the way it hollowed you out when those above you wielded their authority like a weapon. Laya's note had cracked open that old wound, but it also ignited a fire. He had the power now, and he wouldn't let her plea go unanswered. He opened his laptop, its screen casting a blue glow over his worn flannel shirt, and accessed the bistro's security system, a perk of his silent ownership that gave him eyes on every corner of the restaurant. The cameras, installed to protect the business, were about to serve a higher purpose. As the footage loaded, Elliot's thoughts drifted to his teenage years, washing dishes in a diner where the owner skimmed tips and screamed at staff for the smallest mistakes, leaving him and his coworkers too scared to speak up. That memory fueled his focus as he scanned hours of recordings, his jaw tightening with each clip. He saw Victor Clean, the manager, slipping cash from the tip jar into his pocket when he thought no one was watching, his sly grin caught in high definition. Another clip showed him falsifying time cards, clocking servers out early while forcing them to keep working, their faces drawn with exhaustion. The worst came when he found footage of Victor berating Laya for comping a dessert for an elderly regular, a kind old man who came every Tuesday for a slice of pie he could barely afford. Victor's voice, sharp and venomous, reduced Laya to tears in the walk-in freezer, her hands shaking as she whispered apologies. Elliot's stomach churned, his hands clenching into fists, the injustice hitting him like a physical blow. He remembered a moment from his past, sneaking his sandwich to a hungry coworker, only to be caught and docked a day's pay, the shame and anger burning in his chest. Now, watching Laya endure the same cruelty, he felt that old rage resurface. But this time, he wasn't powerless. He meticulously documented every infraction, saving screen recordings, timestamps, and audio clips, building a case as airtight as the ones he'd crafted in his early days as a corporate investigator before his wealth took him to quieter shadows. The footage revealed more than theft. Victor's tyranny had created a culture of fear, servers flinching at his approach, boozers scurrying to avoid his wrath. One clip showed a young dishwasher, barely 18, wiping tears in the alley after Victor docked his pay for a chipped plate. Elliot's heart ached for them, each face a reminder of the team he'd once been part of, scraping by in a world that didn't care. Laya's note, now tucked safely in his pocket, was a lifeline thrown to him. And he wondered again how she'd known to trust him. Had she seen his name on a lease? Overheard a whispered conversation? Her desperation suggested she'd been watching, waiting for someone to step in, and somehow, she'd chosen him. The weight of that trust settled over him, heavy but grounding. As he saved the final clip, a moment where Victor sneered at Laya for giving a glass of water to a homeless woman, calling it a waste, Elliot's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about saving a failing restaurant anymore. It was about dismantling a system of abuse that had festered under his watch. He leaned back in his seat, the laptop's glow reflecting in his tired eyes, knowing sleep wouldn't come tonight. The evidence was overwhelming, a digital indictment of Victor's greed. But Elliot needed to be careful. Confronting him would mean exposing his own identity, a risk he'd avoided for years to keep his investments discreet. Yet Laya's courage, her shaky handwriting, demanded action, and he couldn't turn away. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks, Elliot closed his laptop, his mind made up. He'd return to the bistro, not as Tom Reed, but as Elliot Carter, the owner with the power to make things right, ready to face the man who'd turned a place of warmth into a prison for its staff. Elliot Carter strode into the Maplewood Beastro the next afternoon, no longer cloaked in the anonymity of Tom Reed's flannel and sneakers, but as himself, a billionaire in a crisp black button-down, flanked by two sharp-eyed lawyers clutching briefcases stuffed with evidence. The air in the restaurant felt different today, heavier with anticipation, as if the walls themselves sensed the reckoning to come. The previous night's footage still burned in his mind: Victor Clean's sneering face, Laya Harper's tear-streaked cheeks in the freezer, the quiet despair of a staff crushed under greed. Laya's napkin, with its desperate plea, "He's stealing from us. Please help," was folded in his pocket, a talisman of her courage that had propelled him here. The dining room was half full, the lunch crowd murmuring over their plates, unaware of the storm about to break. Victor stood near the host stand, barking at a server for a misaligned napkin, his slick hair gleaming under the pendant lights. When he saw Elliot and the lawyers, his voice faltered, his eyes narrowing with a flicker of recognition, though he couldn't quite place the man he'd dismissed as a nobody the night before. Elliot's heart pounded, not with fear, but with the weight of responsibility, the memory of his own days as a dishwasher in a diner, where cruelty went unchecked, fueling his resolve. He stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding, and placed a tablet on the host stand, its screen already cued to the damning footage. Without a word, he pressed play, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The first clip showed Victor pocketing cash tips, his fingers quick and practiced, his smirk caught in stark clarity. Gasps rippled through the staff as servers and boozers emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the sudden silence. The next clip played Victor berating Laya for comping a dessert for an elderly regular, his words cutting like knives as she stood trembling, her hands clasped tightly to keep from breaking. Elliot watched Laya now, standing near the back, her eyes wide with shock, her lips parting as she realized her note had reached the right hands. The footage shifted to Victor docking a young dishwasher's pay for a chipped plate, the boy's face crumpling in the alley, and a low murmur of anger spread among the staff. Elliot's voice finally broke the silence, steady and deliberate. "Victor Clean, you're done here, effective immediately." Victor's face drained of color, his mouth opening to protest, but the lawyers stepped forward, one handing him a termination notice, while the other signaled to security waiting by the door. The staff watched, frozen, as Victor stammered, his usual arrogance crumbling under the weight of exposure. When the clip of him shoving Laya's shoulder played, a collective gasp filled the room, and Laya's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling but not falling. Elliot met her gaze, offering a nod that carried a promise of justice, and she returned it, her lips trembling with a mix of relief and disbelief. As security escorted Victor out, his protests fading into the afternoon light, the bistro seemed to exhale, the tension that had gripped it for months loosening its hold. Elliot turned to the staff, their faces a mix of shock, hope, and cautious trust, and spoke softly, "Some of you may have suspected who I am. I'm Elliot Carter, the owner of this bistro, and I've seen what you've been through." His eyes lingered on Laya, her courage the spark that had brought him here. "One of you had the bravery to speak up, and that's why this ends today." The words hung in the air, and he saw shoulders relax, eyes soften, as servers whispered to each other, piecing together the truth. Laya's gaze met his again, and he saw the weight of her sacrifice writing that note, risking her job, her family's stability, all for a chance at justice. Elliot's thoughts flashed back to his own past, standing up to a tyrant boss as a young man, only to be fired and blacklisted, his voice ignored. Now, as the owner, he had the power to amplify Laya's voice, to ensure her courage wasn't in vain. The lawyers began distributing copies of the evidence to HR, ensuring Victor's actions would face legal consequences. But Elliot's focus remained on the staff, their weary faces now lit with a flicker of hope. This moment was more than a firing, it was a turning point, a chance to rebuild what Victor had broken. As the lunch crowd resumed their meals, unaware of the seismic shift, Elliot felt the weight of Laya's trust, her note still in his pocket, urging him to act not just as an owner, but as a man who understood the cost of silence. The Maplewood Beastro hummed with a cautious new energy the week after Victor Clean's ousting. The air lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled years of tension. But Elliot Carter knew the work of healing a broken place had only just begun. Standing in the dining room, now absent Victor's menacing presence, he watched the staff move with tentative hope, their smiles less forced, their steps less hurried. Laya Harper's note, still tucked in his pocket, had been the spark, but it was up to him to fan it into lasting change. He wasted no time, calling an all-staff meeting the morning after the confrontation. His crisp black shirt replaced with a simple sweater to signal he was one of them, not a distant tycoon. The servers, boozers, and cooks gathered in the dining room, their faces a mix of relief and uncertainty, still reeling from the footage that had exposed Victor's cruelty. Elliot stood at the front, his voice steady but warm, and announced immediate changes. Every employee would receive back pay for the wages Victor had skimmed, plus interest, wired directly to their accounts by the end of the day. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room, and he saw Laya, standing near the back, clutch her hands together, her eyes glistening as she realized her family's struggles might ease. He went further, introducing a mental health stipend for each worker, anonymous, no questions asked, to acknowledge the toll of Victor's reign. The staff exchanged glances, some wiping tears, others nodding in quiet gratitude. Elliot's thoughts drifted to his own past, scrubbing dishes in a diner where a kind word or small bonus could have meant the world, and he vowed this bistro would be different. He turned his gaze to Laya, her auburn hair catching the morning light, and announced her promotion to assistant general manager, effective immediately, with a raise and full benefits. Her jaw dropped, and a soft cheer rose from her co-workers, who knew the sacrifices she'd made raising her younger sibling, Mia, on a waitress's pay, often skipping meals to ensure Mia had enough. Laya's eyes met Elliot's, and he saw a mix of pride and disbelief, her courage now rewarded with a role that could change her life. To replace Victor, he promoted Maria, a veteran server with a calm demeanor and a knack for diffusing tension, ensuring the bistro would be led by someone who understood its heart. Elliot also unveiled new policies, quarterly performance audits for all managers, mandatory HR training, and an anonymous reporting system to prevent future abuses. The staff nodded, their trust in him growing, though some still watched him warily, unsure if this billionaire truly understood their world. Over the next few days, the bistro transformed. The kitchen staff laughed again, their chatter filling the air as they prepped meals. Customers noticed the change, leaving glowing reviews about the warm service and vibrant atmosphere. Elliot spent hours at the bistro, not as a shadowy owner, but as a visible presence, rolling up his sleeves to help clear tables during a rush, earning surprised smiles from the team. He learned their stories. Javier, the dishwasher, sent money home to his family in Mexico. Sarah, a server, was saving for nursing school. Each conversation deepened his resolve, reminding him of his own days scraping by, dreaming of a future he could barely imagine. Laya's story hit him hardest. During a quiet moment, she shared how she'd written the note in a desperate burst of courage, terrified Victor would find out, but driven by the sight of her co-workers' despair. She'd suspected Elliot's identity after overhearing Victor curse about a silent owner meddling in the books, and she'd taken the leap, hoping the stranger in the flannel shirt was more than he seemed. Her trust humbled him, stirring memories of his own small acts of defiance as a young man, slipping food to a hungry co-worker despite the risk. Elliot ensured the bistro's physical space reflected its new spirit, investing in small upgrades, fresh paint, repaired chairs, and a new coffee machine the staff had begged for. The changes weren't just cosmetic, they signaled a commitment to the team, a promise that their voices mattered. By week's end, the bistro felt alive again, its candlelit tables glowing with genuine warmth. Elliot stood in the doorway one evening, watching Laya train a new server with confidence, her weariness replaced by purpose. He felt a pang of pride, not just for saving his investment, but for honoring the trust of a woman who'd risked everything with 4 shaky words. The bistro wasn't just a business anymore, it was a community rebuilt on the foundation of Laya's courage and his own rediscovered humanity. Real Stories Diary brings you the Maplewood Bistro's incredible transformation. The Maplewood Bistro glowed under the soft evening light, its wooden beams and candlelit tables alive with the hum of happy customers and a staff finally free from the shadow of Victor Clean's tyranny, a transformation sparked by Laya Harper's courageous note and Elliot Carter's resolve to make things right. Weeks had passed since the confrontation, and the bistro had become a beacon of hope in the small town, its reputation soaring as word of mouth spread about its renewed warmth and exceptional service. Elliot stood in the doorway one evening, no longer the anonymous Tom Reed in flannel, but a welcome figure in a simple sweater, his presence a quiet reassurance to the team. The air smelled of fresh bread and rosemary, and the clink of glasses mingled with laughter from the kitchen, a sound that had been absent for too long. Laya, now assistant general manager, moved through the dining room with newfound confidence, her auburn hair catching the light as she checked on tables, her smile genuine and unburdened. The bistro's revival was more than financial, it was a rebirth of spirit, and Elliot felt a deep pride, not for his wealth or power, but for the part he played in amplifying Laya's voice. He thought of her note *, he's stealing from us. Please help *, still tucked in his desk drawer at home, a reminder of the moment everything changed. The staff's trust in him had grown, their weary glances replaced by nods of gratitude, and he made a point to know their names and stories, from Javier's dreams of opening his own food truck to Sarah's late-night study sessions for nursing school. Laya's story stayed with him most. She'd shared it over coffee one quiet afternoon, her voice soft but steady as she described raising her younger sibling, Mia, on her own after their parents' passing. Every shift at the bistro had been a battle to keep their tiny apartment and Mia's school supplies paid for. Writing the note had been a desperate act, born in the dead of night after watching Victor dock a co-worker's pay for a spilled tray, her hands shaking as she scribbled her plea, unsure if the stranger in the corner booth was really the owner she'd heard whispered about. Her courage had been a leap of faith, and Elliot's response, exposing Victor, restoring wages, promoting her, had changed her life, giving her the stability to dream again. The bistro's new policies, from quarterly audits to anonymous reporting, ensured no one like Victor could rise again. And the cameras, once tools of intimidation, now protected the staff, their footage monitored by an independent HR firm. Customers raved online, their reviews praising the food and the staff's warmth, unaware of the battle fought behind the scenes. Elliot had invested in small touches, a new menu with Laya's input, a cozy reading nook for waiting guests, and the bistro thrived, its tables booked weeks in advance. Yet for Elliot, the true victory was personal. He'd started as a dishwasher, scraping by in a world that didn't care. And though his billions had distanced him from that life, Laya's note had pulled him back, reminding him why he'd fought to rise in the first place. He thought of his own small rebellions as a young man, slipping extra food to a hungry coworker, risking punishment to ease someone's pain. Laya's act mirrored his own, and in honoring her trust, he'd rediscovered a piece of himself he'd buried under years of wealth and isolation. One evening, as the bistro buzzed with its usual crowd, Laya approached him, her apron neatly tied, her eyes bright with something new hope. She thanked him quietly, her voice steady but thick with emotion, explaining how the raise in benefits meant Mia could join a school art program, a dream she'd thought impossible. She admitted she'd nearly thrown the note away, terrified of Victor's wrath, but something about Elliot's quiet presence that night had given her courage. He listened, his heart full, and left a generous tip, not as a billionaire flexing his wealth, but as a man honoring the human connection they'd forged. As he stepped into the cool night air, the bistro's warm lights fading behind him, Elliot felt a profound shift. The Maplewood Beastro wasn't just a business, it was a testament to what one voice could do, a reminder that justice starts at the ground level with people like Laya who dared to speak and people like him who chose to listen. He glanced back through the window, seeing Laya laugh with a coworker, her weariness replaced by purpose, and knew this was why he'd answered her call, not for profit, but for the chance to right a wrong and rebuild a community. The stars above twinkled faintly, and Elliot walked to his car, lighter than he'd felt in years, knowing that one handwritten note had changed not just the bistro, but him. Thank you for joining us on Real Stories Diary. Subscribe for more stories of courage and redemption.